Part 6. Hawaii. In Sacramento I met an Englishman. Some Englishmen are typical of their country. This one was not. He was small and very fussy, what Australians would call sissy. His pockets were full of spectacles, some dark green, some blue, some with rims, some without. Half his time seemed to be taken up with trying to find the right pair for the occasion or hunting through his pockets for a pair he had lost. One day, when he had found the pair reserved for his conversations with globe-trotting young women, he told me about his experiences in the Hawaiian Islands. He had been a bookkeeper on a sugar estate on the large island of Hawaii and remarked how badly that particular estate wanted water. He said that the manager had tried to get one of those funny sort of people, who walk about with a piece of stick and tell you where water is, but couldn't find one. This led to my saying that I was myself one of those funny people and that I had been able to find water ever since I was a child. After searching for another pair of spectacles, he wrote a letter to the manager of the estate telling him about my divining and suggesting that I might be useful in finding water. The manager replied by cable, and all letters sent to him by me and the man of many spectacles were answered in the same way. It was finally arranged that I should go to Hawaii and work on the sugar estate. I was to be paid my traveling expenses to and from Hawaii and receive a fee for each well as it was developed. If I had been less of a greenhorn, I would have realized that the cablegram was somewhat ambiguous and vague and that the agreement was hardly binding on the manager or satisfactory from my point of view. But I was, no doubt, over-anxious to accept, as it appeared to be a wonderful opportunity of seeing another Hawaiian island seldom visited by tourists. When I arrived at the plantation I found that the manager was living in a very nice house in a lovely garden overlooking the bluest of blue seas, over which there brooded a curious blood-red mist which is occasionally seen in Hawaiian waters. My hostess was very pleasant and, as I sat drinking tea and eating delicious little cakes, with the heavy scent of gardenias creeping through the open windows, I felt very satisfied with life, and steeped in comfort like a well-fed cat. But I gave up purring when my host, the manager of the plantation, came in. He was small and dark and obviously had a large proportion of native blood in his veins. He had a curious rasping voice and spoke with a slight lisp. There was something very snake-like and repulsive about him, which disgusted me. It was just as well that I had had my tea before he came in, for the delicious little cakes and scones disappeared like magic. When he had cleared up everything in sight, he asked me to go with him to the office to meet the overseer, who was to take me about. The latter was a young man, white and very pleasant. After putting me in his charge, the manager left us and I saw very little more of him, except at meals, for which I was very thankful. I found that the overseer was very interested in divining and anxious to see whether he could learn to do it himself. I explained that, first of all, it was necessary to find out whether he had the gift, as, without it, no amount of study or practice would make him a diviner. I promised to test him out and to help him in every way I could. Next morning, he and I set out on horseback to the furthest part of the estate, an area which was particularly waterless. In those days, I used to work with the old-fashioned forked stick, like the letter Y with a short tail, and we stopped at several clumps of bushes to look for something suitable. They are not always easy to find, as each branch of the fork should be of equal thickness. Finally we found a good tree with many forked sticks and cut an extra one for my companion, for I will never let anyone touch any tool which I am using myself as I find that it becomes unreliable and difficult when I am divining. I found an excellent supply of good water and explained everything to the overseer as I worked. First, I drag my heel on the ground to mark my progress and get someone to follow me with a sharp tool or stick to deepen the marks. For instance, if there are 2 or more streams crossing, I mark the edges of the streams and the exact spot where they cross, so that there is a record of what I have found clearly marked on the ground for reference when drilling or digging. All work is also recorded in a notebook. When I had finished, I showed the overseer how to hold the rod and, as he himself had done the ground marking, he knew exactly where he ought to get his reactions. But nothing happened. I then took his rod and used it, walking over the streams where it reacted well. I find that in doing this for a beginner it often helps. I call it tuning it in, but I have no more knowledge of what the force or emanation is to which I tune in than I had when I was a child. I do not even know what to call it, which is the great difficulty in writing about divining. I am always hoping that one of the scientists who are doing such amazing things in photography, such as photographing an acorn or horse chestnut and getting an image of the future tree in all its details, will find that he himself has the gift of divining and will set to work to discover what is the force which we diviners come into contact with and make use of. He might also prepare a scientific phraseology for our use and possibly even photograph the force or emanation rising from the ground, which would be no more remarkable than obtaining a photograph of a future tree from the seed from which it will spring. I have sometimes seen the emanation myself, rising like a blue misty smoke, very much like the smoke you get when burning autumn leaves in England. However, the overseer hadn't the gift and was very disappointed, so I put my hands on his wrists and told him to try again. This time he couldn't hold the rod and had a large piece of skin taken off his tough hands by the violence of the reaction. Instead of being annoyed, he nearly burst with pride. When he tried again by himself, he got a slight reaction, especially when I touched him. He was out at the same spot at dawn next morning full of hope and enthusiasm, to try his rod by himself, but it would not work. I have known this happen many times. So long as the diviner is with the beginner, the latter seems to get a slight reaction, which he will not get by himself unless he really has the gift. I found excellent water for this sugar estate in most places near where it was required. It was fit for human consumption, as well as for irrigation purposes, and was at a reasonable depth, so I felt that the work was well done and that the time had come for me to return to Honolulu, which I had made my headquarters. I then broached the subject of developing the wells and the payment of my fees to the manager. That snaky gentleman then bared his fangs. "I have no intention of developing any of your wells until after the sugar crop is in, Miss Penrose," he said, and added, "and perhaps not then." It was the first time that I had come up against a really dishonest man and I had no idea how to handle the situation, but I did manage to say, "But what about my fares? They were specially mentioned in my letters and you said in your cable that you agreed to the terms." "My cable," he replied, with his eyes flickering, but never meeting mine. "My cable? Ha! Ha! If you are so stupid as to accept a cable as a guarantee, you deserve all you get. And now you have got it." With that he got up and squirmed out of the room. It was obvious that he intended to develop the wells as soon as he got rid of me. It was equally obvious that he had no intention of paying me a single dollar. The overseer drove me down to the boat for Honolulu and I told him about it. He seemed genuinely distressed and I wondered whether his own contract with the snaky gentleman was watertight. No doubt the manager knew that my contract was unenforceable at law. When I got back to Honolulu, a very charming Englishman, resident there, to whom I had an introduction, took me to his lawyer, who said that, under local law, a contract made by telegram or cablegram could not be enforced, unless confirmed in writing by the party concerned. I wrote to the man of many spectacles in Sacramento and told him what had happened, but received no reply, which struck me as odd, seeing that he had been instrumental in my going to Hawaii in the first place. However, if my visit to Hawaii did not increase my bank balance, it at least taught me some worldly wisdom and enabled me to see another delightful island, the memory of which I wouldn't part with for many fees. Honolulu is a delightful place in which to spend a winter, with its balmy climate, luxurious hotels and happy, carefree people, many of whom I had the pleasure of meeting. But living for any length of time a life of lazy luxury amidst extravagant beauty is rather like a diet of pate de foie gras, meringues and champagne, fine in small doses but impossible as a daily menu. The whole atmosphere was so unreal that I felt the time had come for me to move on and do some work myself. A few days later I booked my passage on the Aorangi, sailing between Australia and Canada, for another new country where I was to have some of the greatest divining adventures of my life. End of Part 6.